Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the online Bhakti Shastri Bhagavad Gita course. Today we're doing lesson 10 of unit 1, and we're beginning the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Translations and purports by ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Abhaycharan Aravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. In our previous lesson, we were discussing the interesting issue of the responsibility of suffering and how the living entity is responsible for our activities, and those desires are recorded by the Paramatma and facilitated by the material energy, and ultimately the living entity is responsible for the sufferings that we endure in this world. We were looking at the yoga ladder, the different processes on the yoga ladder, how one progresses from one stage to the next, the results of the different yoga processes, and also we were discussing how modern religious processes and theological concepts and philosophical systems reflect fundamentally the different stages of the yoga ladder. Let's have a look at an overview of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Dhyana Yoga. Verses 1 to 9, the Yoga Rurukshu and the Yoga Rudha practice. 10 to 17 describe stages in yoga practice and samadhi, the Ashtanga Yoga Sadhana process we'll be looking at in those verses. Verses 28 to 32, the realization of the Paramatma Vadi, Paramatma realization. And then Ashtanga Yoga is rejected by Arjuna, in text 33 to 36. And then in our subsequent lesson, which will be the concluding lesson for the unit, we'll be discussing the destination of the unsuccessful yogi, as Arjuna inquires, and the conclusion of the 6th chapter, the topmost yogi. In text number 3 of chapter 6, Krishna uses the term Yoga Rudhasya and Yoga Rurukshu to describe the preliminary and the more advanced stages of the Ashtanga Yoga, Ashta Anga. Ashta is 8, Ashta Anga, the 8 limbs yoga system. Here also described as Dhyana Yoga system, because the essential characteristic of the Ashtanga Yoga process is Dhyana, meditation. Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur in his comments on this verse are explaining that Yoga Rudhasya stage begins from the stage of Dhyana and Samadhi. Prabhupada does discuss these different 8 steps of Ashtanga Yoga in different places in Bhagavad Gita. To briefly explain them, the Yama is activities which should be done, Niyama, activities which should be avoided. Asan means the different sitting postures. Pranayam means the breathing exercises. Pratyahara, the mentality of turning the senses within. Dharana means concentration. Dhyana, meditation. And Samadhi means unbroken meditation. Krishna explains in text number 6, Bandhur atmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jita anatmanastu satrudvai bhatatatmava satruvat. That the actual essence of the Ashtanga Yoga process is to control the mind. And Prabhupada comments in the purport to text 5, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandhamakshaya. Mind can either be the bandhu, the friend, or the shatru, the enemy. And the essential key to yoga practice is controlling the mind. Karanam bandha mokshaya. Mana eva manushyanam. Prabhupada's quoting from the Amrita Bindu Upanishad that mind, mana eva manushyanam, the mind for mankind, karanam bandha mokshaya, is the cause of either entanglement or liberation. Bandhaya vishaya shango, when the mind is attached to vishaya shanga, attached to sense enjoyments, that's the cause of bondage. Muktai nirivishayam manaha, and the mind detached from sense enjoyment is the cause of liberation. Prabhupada's commenting, the purpose of practicing Eightfold Yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc., and that way one will become victimized. Now this is in the purport to text 6. So the process of Ashtanga Yoga is, sometimes Prabhupada uses the term mechanical process, whereby one has to conquer the unconquered mind, conquer the restless mind, and that can be done in a preliminary method by the asan process. One can practice asan and achieve asan siddhi. Asan siddhi is perfection of a sitting posture. And one is required to sit in the posture for hours on end, and 3, 4, 5 hours of sitting in Padmasana or other postures. And this is a method of controlling the mind. I once asked one yoga teacher, but I couldn't quite see the connection. I once asked that Padmasana is described that Padmasana, lotus posture, sitting, Padmasana, is conducive and supportive of brahmacharya, celibacy. And I couldn't quite make the connection. Other postures are a little more clear. Paschimuttanasana, you can, for brahmacharya, Sirsasana, yes. But Padmasana, how it actually contributes to celibacy. So I asked the yoga instructor, he was also a Swami, and I said, Swamiji, how is it that Padmasana actually can support the practice of brahmacharya? And he replied that, well, if you can tolerate the inconvenience of sitting in Padmasana like that without moving for 3 hours, and tolerating sex urge is nothing. So this is like a brutal method of just restraining the mind. I can share experiences from my own personal efforts in practicing Yogasana. That actually that's how you can become good in Yogasana. It's not about externally in general gymnastic approach, we take an external approach, and we think that we're externally, and we push the body into the various postures externally. But the Yogasana is not approached in that way. It's approached internally. That one has to relax. One has to relax the mind, and then through the appropriate breathing, one can relax, and then the body can actually open up and relax, and one can. By controlling the mind, actually the body flows. The body is an external reflection of the mentality, and one can very, very deeply enter into postures. It's all about relaxing the mind, using the breathing techniques to relax the mind. And this is a mechanical process. Of course, one can experience great mental tranquility and also good health as a result of effective and appropriate practice of Yogasana. So we encourage, of course, for those who like to keep healthy, and our GBC in ISKCON also has given the GBC law that each ISKCON temple should provide facility and time for temple residents to perform Hatha Yoga or Yogasana. So it's authorized, particularly for the health benefits, and also can have a direct effect on a person's mental health, because you can experience great freedom from anxiety and stress as a result of regular Yogasana practice. There is benefit, but actually to practice in that way, to get to the point of realizing your relationship with Krishna, this is a very difficult process. It takes a very long time. And the direct path of Bhakti Yoga, immediately accepting the activities of serving Lord Hari, devotional activities, hearing, chanting, serving the Lord, associating with Vaishnavas, is a much easier way of awakening one's dormant Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada's continuing in purport to text 6. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. So it's not that we have to go around it the long way by first of all denying the mind from wandering here and there and learning to control the mind, and then gradually cultivating meditation of the Lord Hari in the heart and an awakening affection. It's a very difficult process compared to Krishna consciousness by direct process of worshipping Krishna, chanting Hare Krishna, Sankirtan. then one is already functioning as the eternal servant of Krishna, and just continuing in that way, one dissolves the false ego and a misidentification with the body, and it revives one's eternal love of Krishna. Hare Krishna Mahamantra Jaito Shabhav, when Mahaprabhu inquired from Ishvara Puri after receiving the Mahamantra in Gaya and feeling the tremendous effect in regular chanting. Of course, Mahaprabhu, he's acting as a disciple for our benefit. He inquired from Ishvara Puri, Prabhupada, Kiva mantra dilo Goshai? Well, what kind of mantra have you given me, O Shami? Kiva ta bol, what is its power? Jopati mantra, Koryale Pago. It's made me crazy chanting this Hare Krishna. And what type of mantra have you given me? Kiva mantra dilo Goshai? And Ishvara Puri replied that he was very impressed. Bhalo, Wailo Tumi Param Purushato, my child. It's very wonderful that you have attained love of Krishna. It's the purpose of life. I'm indebted to you, Ishvara Puri said. I'm indebted to you because as a disciple you've awakened love of God. That's the whole purpose of discipleship. And in answering the question, Kiba mantra dilo, what kind of mantra? Ishvara Puri responded, Hare Krishna, Mahamantra Jaito Shabhav, the very nature, Jaito Shabhav, the very nature of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is Jai Jape, whoever chants, Jai Jape, Tare Krishna, those who chant for them in relation to Krishna, Tare Krishna Upajaye Bhav. There will be awakening of feelings. One will awaken love for Krishna just by chanting Hare Krishna. This is the direct process of Krishna consciousness. When we hear the descriptions in the spiritual sky of the eternal residents of the Lord who are associating with the Lord in his eternal abode, they're not performing a yogasan, because the yogasan being a mechanical process, you'll perform for some time until the mind is conquered and then you've awakened your realization, Paramatma realization, then no more yogasan, then samadhi. But in Krishna consciousness, is from the beginning stage is samadhi. And because the activity of chanting Hare Krishna is the eternal function of the soul, which you'll be doing in your eternal position, serving the Lord, satatam kirtayantamam, susukam kartum, serving the Lord. And Krishna consciousness, bhakti yoga, means we simply begin that process now and use these senses. Karmana manasa gira nikalashapi avarshtashu jivan mukta. Just by using the mind to think of Krishna, using the words to glorify Krishna, using the senses to serve Lord Hari, Rupa Goswami explains, Nikala avashtashu, regardless of one's situation in life, ashram, gender, etc., jivan mukta, a liberated person, because he's already achieved the platform of the eternal position as servant of Krishna and functioning directly in that capacity. This is the direct process of bhakti yoga. Prabhupada's commenting, mind is the driver. Prabhupada's lecturing on these verses 6:2 to 5 in 1969 in Los Angeles. Mind is the driver. If you ask your driver, please get me into Krishna consciousness temple, the driver will bring you here. And if you ask your driver, please get me in that liquor house, the driver will drive you there. The driver's business is simply to drive you wherever you like. And there's a nice picture here of the reins of the horses. The horses are choked up to the reins. So the reins are like the mind, and the driver is like the intelligence, and the soul is the passenger. So the mind is simply being agitated and being pulled by the various senses. The intelligence is trying to keep a hold on it, but generally the senses just drag the mind from one place to another. This is why internet is so appealing to the conditioned soul, because it allows you a realm in which the mind can freely roam without any restriction. That's why people get addicted to internet, because it gives them a facility to mental freedom. You can go wherever your mind wants. You can simply wander. They call that surfing. It's just like you're getting tossed around. The mind can just go anywhere. It can just go around the universe multiple times, just on internet. And therefore people are so addicted to that freedom, that level. It's actually the cyberspace is a whole new reality, it's a whole new form of Maya. It's a whole new form of Maya. It's a whole new reality in which you can enjoy the illusory reality, and it's actually very illusory. different from the gross senses that we have. It's a whole new type of Maya, the cyberspace that can bewilder our minds and divert our minds from Krishna consciousness. It's very powerful, the whole internet experience. So the mind is simply, in general, the mind is victimized by our senses, by the sensual input. What we hear, we can get agitated. What we see, we can get agitated. What we smell, etc., etc. The thing with the internet, it's like a direct connection that you're not even going through your gross senses. It's just as you see, and it's directly into the mind. It's like a direct uplink cable plug into the mind, which gives you direct access. And in this way, the mind wanders. Similarly, your mind is the driver. If you lose control, then wherever he likes, he will take you. Then you're gone. Then your driver is your enemy. But if your driver acts on your order, then he is your friend. In verses 10 to 17 of the 6th chapter, Krishna, he describes in detail the process of Ashtanga Yoga sadhana. And many of the points that Krishna mentions are here listed for analysis. Text 10, ekaki, one has to be alone. Shocho deshe means the pure land, not in a city. Chailagya kushutaram, sitting on the kusha grass. Jaradanam achalam shtira, dharanam achalam. One should not move. In practicing the meditation, one shouldn't move. Vigata bhi, devoid of fear. Brahmachari brate, celibate. Prashanta, peaceful, uneducated. Much chitta, concentrating the mind on Krishna. Nirvana parama, stops material existence, the spiritual life, and jukta, regulated. So this is the practice. And generally, what we see in modern yoga schools, many of these principles are neglected. For example, ekaki, alone, yoga should be performed alone, not in a group of others. And one time I was in a remote place in Tasmania, it's an island in the south of Australia, and we were doing Sankirtan in Tasmania, where we were driving along the northwest coast. It was a very remote place, actually. There's only 1 or 2 towns along the whole of the northwest coast of Tasmania. It's very rocky, very remote. And there's the whole South Sea there. Is that South Sea or South China Sea or South Indian Ocean? South Indian Ocean, that's where that Malaysian airplane got lost, never to be found again. It's just a vast emptiness down there. The people that we met were telling us that this is recorded scientifically as the cleanest air in the world. The people living in the northwest of Tasmania. As we were driving through those mountains, I was reflecting on these verses of Gita and considering the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. And you go out into the mountains and you live on your own. That just requires great determination and great fearlessness, which we lack in the modern age. Even recently I was traveling in the Badrinath, Ashram, Kedarnath, up in the Himalayas. And similarly, the Himalayan mountains are so vast. But generally, even the yogis who are there, they're living alongside of Alakananda Ganga or Bhagirati Ganga, Mandakini Ganga. They're living in somewhat close to Ganga, and they're not just like way out there in the middle of the nowhere, because it just becomes unlivable. Ganga is there. Just by living in the Ganga, the yogis can sustain their lives in the cave. I saw several yogis in the caves. They have a fire, and pilgrims come and give vegetables, give rice, and so they're able to cook. They eat little. As long as one has access to water, and particularly these holy rivers, Alakananda Ganga, Bhagirati Ganga, then one can actually sustain one's life very comfortably. If one is a yogi, in a river he can bathe, we can get water for drinking, can wash clothes, wash their kombal, etc., and that's it. And live in a cave. And some pilgrims will come by on occasion, leave some vegetables, some rice, and in this way the yogis sustain themselves. This is Socho Deshe. Not meant for in the cities, in clubs and institutes, etc. Meant to be practiced alone, in a remote place, in a pure place. Dharanam achalam, one has to sit without moving. That's also not such an easy thing to do. Brahmachari brate, etc. And these are the principles, these are the practices of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga sadhana. And Krishna goes on to explain that as a result of practicing in this way, one shukhena brahma shangsparsha, one comes in contact with Brahma Shuk, spiritual happiness, atyantam shukam ashnute, and enjoys atyantam, there's unending, and enjoys unending spiritual happiness as a result of Shukha Brahma Shangsparsha, connecting and realizing the identity, the Atma Tattva, Atma Gyan Upalabdhi, realizing one is not the body and realizing the presence of the Supersoul in the heart. One can attain the Paramatma realization as is desired by the Ashtanga Yogis in the Sadhana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga Sadhana practice. In text 33 and 34, Prabhupada comments on the practicality of the Ashtanga Yoga system for the modern age. The present age is characterized by a bitter struggle for a life of short duration. People are not serious about self-realization, even if it's a simple, practical means, even by simple, practical means. What to speak of this difficult yoga system? Arjuna thought it was impossible to follow this system of yoga. In the verse, Arjuna is explaining that the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable for me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. Chanchalam himana Krishna, pramati balavad dridham, tashaham nigraham manyai vayariva shadushkara. May be easier to control a raging hurricane than to control my mind as you have been instructing, because the mind is chanchal. It is constantly, it cannot remain on one thing. The nature of the mind, chanchal. It constantly wants to flicker and move from one thing to the other. As we were mentioning, the way internet is so addictive, because it facilitates the nature of the mind to flick from one thing to the next. And pramati balavat dridham is very obstinate. We have experienced that when you've made a decision in your mind to do something, then basically there's nothing you can do to prevent yourself. The mind will just completely torment you until you act in that way. It's very pramati balavat dridham, very powerful, very determined, and virtually impossible to go against. And this is Arjuna's exclamation. Prabhupada's commenting that Arjuna thought it was impossible to follow this system of yoga, even though he was favorably endowed in many ways. He belonged to the royal family and was highly elevated in terms of numerous qualities. He was a great warrior, he had great longevity, and above all, he was the most intimate friend of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, 5,000 years ago. Arjuna had much better facilities than we do now, yet he refused to accept this system of yoga. In fact, we do not find any record in history of his practicing it at any time. Therefore, this system must be considered generally impossible in the age of Kali. In lecturing on this verse, on verses 32 to 40 in 1966, Prabhupada's commenting, just imagine what his qualification. He is direct friend of Krishna, and he is a great warrior. He has got administrative capacity, and at the same time his knowledge, comparing his knowledge, his Bhagavad Gita, he understood within 1 hour. This Bhagavad Gita, which is not understood in one life at the present moment, he understood this Bhagavad Gita in 1 hour. So how much intelligent he was. And he belonged to the royal family, all facilities were there. He is accepting that it is not possible for me. Do you think that was impossible for Arjuna 5,000 years ago, before in such favorable circumstances? Is it possible for you? Do you belong to the Arjuna category? No, we are thousands of times lower than Arjuna category. And what was impossible for Arjuna, do you think it will be possible for you? So in general, the Ashtanga Yoga process, as Krishna explains in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, is not practical in the modern age for the average person, for most people. When we look at the principles, we're very difficult to maintain. Finding a sanctified place now, very difficult. You'll find the towers. Of course, when the devotees went to Kedarnath, then they weren't able to communicate with us on their mobiles. But in Badrinath, everywhere, in mobile towers, there's no Socho Desh, purified place, because everything is infiltration of materialism. Even in the remote Himalayas, you'll find. When we analyze the principles of Ashtanga Yoga, as Krishna has listed in texts 10 to 17 of chapter 6, Actually, we can see that in the simple and sublime and practical process of Krishna consciousness, many of these principles actually we can follow. For example, when Krishna is mentioning ekaki, that inherently means that one has to give up association of those who are not interested in spiritual life. So, in general, the yogi would live alone. However, in Krishna consciousness, Rupa Goswami doesn't recommend that we don't require to live alone. In Krishna consciousness, we don't require to live alone, as Narottam Das Thakur sings, Janame hoy ei abhilash bhakta shane bash. If I can bhakta shange, if I can live with devotees, bhakta shane bash. Tadera charana shevik. If I can live with those who are serving the lotus feet of the six Goswamis, tadera charana sheva bhakta shane bash. Janame hoy ei abhilash. My desire is to live with devotees life after life. And in the association of the devotees, then our enthusiasm to practice Krishna consciousness is enhanced. Socho Deshe, also difficult to find in Himalayas and this place. However, in Krishna consciousness, we can find Socho Desh, even the transcendental. Prabhupada described that the temples of Lord Hari are like embassies of the spiritual world. So not only are they Socho Desh, but they're aprakrito, they are transcendental. Not only are they pure, the transcendental ashram environment, the temple of Lord Hari, where one feels that not in the material world, and we practice Krishna consciousness in the temple of Lord Hari, chanting japa, observing the arati, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this way, the Socho Desh principle can be easily followed in Krishna consciousness. Regarding dharanam achalam stiram, sitting in a without moving, you can practice actually when you're chanting japa. If you like to sit in asan, and don't break the asan, and even not moving. Generally, even if devotees sit in asan, they kind of like rock a little bit. But it's not required to remain completely still. You can practice that. It's quite an interesting way of doing japa without moving and just completely withdrawing all of your energy from the moving and just completely relax the body and put all the energy into simply hearing the sound of the Mahamantra. That's very nice japa, and you can practice that. In fact, in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, Srila Sanatana Goswami Prabhupada mentions that a granta in chanting, if you can sit without breaking the japa, without talking or without interrupting your japa for 1 round, that's good. 2 rounds is even better, but if you can do that for 4 rounds, it's called a granta, a 4-round session of simply sitting and not even moving. Try that for 4 rounds and just chanting. And then after 4 rounds, take a break, stretch a little, try it again. You can practice this. Of course, it may not be so easy for you to chant without moving. It's not required, because Mahaprabhu is explaining that Nam Nam Akari Bahuda Nija Shadra Shakti Tutrapita Niyama Neshmana Na Kalaha. There are no such rules when it comes to chanting. Niyama Neshmana Na Kalaha. You can chant whether you're coming, going. In fact, Thakur Bhaktivinoda sings that Radha Krishna Bolo Shonge Cholo. Radha Krishna Bolo Shonge Cholo. So you can chant while you're moving, and there's no restriction. And that's very convenient, because oftentimes we can chant when we're moving. We may be traveling one city to another, and we can chant. And Prabhupada would take a walk in the morning and he would chant. Sometimes the devotees would go a morning walk, Prabhupada would discuss philosophical issues. Other times Prabhupada would simply chant. In the afternoon, Prabhupada would walk up and down on balcony in his rooms, he would chant. Thakur Bhaktivinoda would walk and chant. So, because chanting is so powerful, because it simply requires hearing, so it's not required for actually to sit still when we're chanting. The effect can be fully experienced even if we're moving when we're chanting. That's the special considerations that Mahaprabhu has given us for the Sankirtan movement. Is called Kevala Ananda Kanda. Kevala Ananda is a blissful process, a blissful path, and doesn't require unnecessary austerity. Devoid of fear, naturally a devotee in Krishna consciousness becomes devoid of fear, because he Tesham Nitta Abhajuktanam Jogakshemam Bahami Aham. Krishna says he personally provides and looks after everything the devotee needs. So where's the question of fear if one is chanting Hare Krishna? Krishna will protect the devotee. Name Bhakti Vinashiti, Krishna is explaining. My devotee never perishes. Brahmacharya brate. In Krishna consciousness, we have our sannyasis who are practicing brahmacharya, our brahmacharis, and also our grihastas. Also, Prabhupada used the term of grihasta brahmachari. If a grihasta is utilizing the genitals to procure Krishna conscious progeny, then he's also considered a brahmachari, Krishna conscious brahmachari grihasta. Prashanta, unagitated, peaceful, much chitta, concentration on Krishna, very easy in Krishna consciousness by absorbing our mind in the activities of Krishna. Savaimana Krishna pada ravindayo. In all of the variegated activities of Krishna consciousness, we can absorb our minds. And jukta, regulated. Jukta ahara, jukta cheshta shakarma, jukta sapna avabodha. Krishna's explaining. Jukta aha, one has to regulate the eating. And that can be done very easily in Krishna consciousness by exclusively eating Krishna prasadam. Viharascha, a devotee takes rest in order to serve Krishna and be healthy. Jukta cheshta shakarma. One shouldn't overly work. One shouldn't work for excessive hours so that there's no time for sadhana and for other responsibilities, preaching, family, relationships, etc. One should work in a regulated way. If one can work directly in the Krishna consciousness movement, then it makes it so much easier for that person to connect their work with Krishna. If one is working outside, then one shouldn't extensively work so that the career takes up all of his energy, but one should, in a regulated way, for a certain period of the day, work to maintain his family and requirements, and give some of the results of that work to spreading Krishna consciousness, and in that way, jukta cheshta shakarma. One's work can also be connected, jukta cheshta shakarma. One's work can be connected to the Supreme. And this way we connect everything, our eating, our recreation, our work, jukta sapna avabodha, waking and sleeping, everything is connected. Jogo bhavati, and this way becoming a yogi, dukkha. One can destroy all the suffering in one's life. This is guaranteed by the words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. So we can see that actually the simple process of Krishna consciousness, actually, apart from dharanam achalam, no, we're not meant to move, so everything else we can actually maintain all of these principles in the sublime and simple process of Krishna consciousness. In comparing the respective position of the Paramatma realized yogi and the bhakta, in lecturing on these verses in 1969, verses 25 to 29 of the 6th chapter, Prabhupada's commenting that how is it that the Krishna conscious devotee, even though he may be what we consider a neophyte devotee, young and just beginning the process of Krishna consciousness, but even at that level, Prabhupada's commenting that he is on a higher platform of realization. He can be considered more advanced in Krishna consciousness, more advanced spiritual position than even the siddha, Ashtanga yogi who's meditating on his own in the remote place. Prabhupada's commenting that. So a Krishna conscious person cannot sit idly. Sit idly. We were mentioning that. Why not so important for us to remain still? Why not so important? Even Krishna say, remain still. A devotee who's preaching, he can't remain still. He can't remain still. If I remain still, then how are we going to connect to the common people? How are we going to share with them the treasure of the holy name if we remain still? So not so much emphasis on remaining still. A Krishna conscious person cannot sit idly. He thinks that such a nice philosophy of life, why it should not be distributed. This is his mission. A yogi may be satisfied with his own elevation. He is sitting in a secluded place, practicing jog, elevating himself to transcendental life. That is his personal concern. But a devotee is not satisfied simply elevating himself. We offer our respect to the Vaishnav. Panchakalpa turubhyascha krupashindubeva patitanam pavanebo vaishnaveva namo namaha. Therefore, the preacher devotee is the most dearest devotee of the Lord. That is stated in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter. Nacha tasman manusheshu kashtid mei priyakritamaha bhavatanatame tasman anya priyataro bhuvi. There's no one as dear to me, nor in this world, in the future will anyone be as dear as the one who is preaching my message. They are going outside, they are preaching, they are meeting opposing elements. Sometimes they are defeated, sometimes disappointed, sometimes able to convince. But that endeavor that I shall go and preach Krishna consciousness is the best service to the Lord. So the Paramatma realized yogi may be perfected his Ashtanga Yoga sadhana and maybe meditating on the Lord in the heart in a secluded place. But Prabhupada's mentioning here that even the beginning devotee, a neophyte devotee, maybe not necessarily advanced in controlling the mind and sense control, but if he makes an endeavor that I shall go and preach Krishna consciousness, that's more pleasing to Lord Hari than the Ashtanga yogi who's concerned only for his own liberation. But the practicing bhakta who's preaching Krishna consciousness and is concerned for the welfare of others and takes an effort to go and share Krishna consciousness with them, he's more intimately united with the Lord because that activity and that mentality is more in alignment with the actual mission of the Lord. In this lesson, we were discussing the Ashtanga Yoga system, the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, preliminary limbs, more advanced limbs. We were discussing how the essential objective of the Ashtanga process is to control the mind, and in that way refrain the mind from its tendencies to chanchal, going here and there, diverting our attention from meditating on the Lord, learn to control the mind, control the senses, and begin to realize and see through meditation the presence of the Lord in the heart. We were discussing the perfection of the Ashtanga Yoga process. We were discussing how Arjuna rejected the Ashtanga Yoga process, which was suggested by Krishna, being impractical and impossible for him. Vaya ivasha duskaram, easier to control a raging hurricane. And we were discussing that, as Prabhupada mentions, that Arjuna were unable to follow this Ashtanga Yoga process, therefore for the common man, for people in general in the Kali Yuga, not possible to achieve success in the Ashtanga Yoga system. And that actually the principles of Ashtanga Yoga, in general, they can be followed in a practical and natural way in Krishna consciousness, as we discussed in detail. And we're also discussing Prabhupada's comparison with the Ashtanga Yogi who's absorbed in his own perfection, and comparing that to the Bhakta who's preaching Krishna consciousness and concerned for the welfare of people in general, and how the Bhakta's approach and practice of preaching Krishna consciousness is more pleasing to the Lord. In our next lesson, which will be the final lesson for the unit, we'll be looking at the Bhakti Yoga, the topmost yoga system. Next lesson will be the final lesson, and we hope you're looking forward to it. Prabhupada ki jai. We can conclude with this comment from Prabhupada. The practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness, may appear to be a very difficult job, but if anyone follows the principles with great determination, the Lord will help. The Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves. Prabhupada ki jai.